Inflation is rising around the world, and food inflation is a major driver of inflationary pressure. This is not surprising. After all, food is a need. Even when prices of food items soar out of control, we continue to buy them because we need to eat. And this inevitably encourages the inflation rate to skyrocket. In Africa, one item that is driving the trend more than others is food prices. Food inflation increased throughout the pandemic, on average, across 20 African countries in the region where monthly food price data are available. On a global scale, the supply disruptions caused by the coronavirus pandemic and Russia's invasion of Ukraine are some of the major drivers responsible for food inflation, and export restrictions imposed by some major food exporters and stockpiling in some countries are other reasons. This suggests that domestic factors such as weather and exchange rates are important contributors to food inflation in African countries. In fact, food prices are set to rise even further, as Russia and Ukraine are major wheat suppliers to many African countries. So in today's video, we will look at the top 15 African countries with the highest food inflation in 2022. You won't believe the country with the highest food inflation in Africa in 2022. So make sure you watch this video to the end. Let's dive right in. 15. Morocco. Food inflation in Morocco averaged 1.5% from 2009 until 2022, reaching an all-time high of 14.6% in August of 2022 and a record low of -3.1% in August of 2014. Morocco has seen a month-on-month increase in the price of food since February 2022, when Russia launched its invasion of Ukraine. The cost of food in Morocco increased by 14.6% in August of 2022 over the same month in the previous year. Despite the rise in food prices as a result of the Russian invasion and the aftermath of COVID-19, Morocco is the second country in the North African region where food prices have risen the least. These realities caused by high food costs continue to bite so severe, with additional pressures on family budgets, and if not properly checked, would lead to more severe economic problems, as such African nations need a serious policy direction targeted at increased food production. 14. Kenya. The cost of food in Kenya increased by 15.5% in September of 2022 over the same month in the previous year. Kenya has had some of the highest spikes in food prices in sub-Saharan Africa this year. The two key drivers of inflation in Kenya's consumer price index are food and energy. Russia's war on Ukraine has raised the price of oil to the highest level in history, which spills over to the rest of the global economy. And about 30% to 50% of Kenya's imported wheat comes from Russia and Ukraine. Ukraine is exporting 60% less wheat this year compared to 2021, leading to a rise in the price of wheat and its derivatives, like bread. Unreliable rains have cut the domestic production of maize and other food crops in Kenya. Production is about 15 to 20% below the 5-year average. Some of the drivers of Kenya's inflation are local, while others are external and beyond its control. 13. Somalia. Food inflation in Somalia averaged 5.8% from 2018 to 2022, reaching an all-time high of 17.5% in July of 2022 and a record low of -3.6% in October of 2020. The cost of food in Somalia increased by 17.5% in July of 2022 over the same month in the previous year. 3 decades of armed conflict, plus climate change, plus rising fuel prices are a crushing burden for Somalis. The ripple effect of the conflict in Ukraine, pushing fuel prices up, is breaking the local market. 12. Senegal. Food inflation in Senegal averaged 3.1% from 2010 until 2022, reaching an all-time high of 17.2% in July of 2022 and a record low of -4.7% in November of 2014. The cost of food in Senegal increased by 17.1% in August of 2022 over the same month in the previous year. Food inflation in Senegal is expected to be 16.7% by the end of this year. In the long term, Senegal's food inflation is projected to trend around 6% in 2023 and 4.5% in 2024. 11. Mozambique. The cost of food in Mozambique increased by 17.4% on September 2022 over the same month in the previous year. The onset of the Ukraine conflict came at a time when global food, fertilizer, and fuel prices were already hitting record heights. Concerns over crop conditions and export availabilities, along with surging energy prices, were already raised on February 2022, before the impact of the conflict could be felt. Global commodity prices have increased sharply, including wheat at 68% higher than its normal average. This was further impacted by the export ban declared by India at the beginning of May, the 9th largest wheat exporter in the world. The global price for wheat has reached a level similar to the 2008 global food crisis. In addition, the Ukraine conflict is having a direct impact on Mozambique's food availability as the country imports essential goods and commodities from both Ukraine and Russia. Mozambique depends on imports for 90% of its wheat and sunflower seed oil needs. The country imports approximately 39% of its wheat from Russia and Ukraine combined. Hey, take a break. Go ahead and hit the like button and then subscribe to this channel. That way, you'll be updated anytime we upload interesting videos such as this one. These encourage us to keep feeding with interesting videos. Let's continue. 10. Uganda. Food inflation in Uganda averaged 5.4% from 1998 until 2022, reaching an all-time high of 40.7% on July 2011 and a record low of negative 11.2% in July 2005. The inflation of food prices has been especially drastic. The cost of food in Uganda increased by 18.4% on September 2022 over the same month in the previous year. For families living on the margins, an increase of such magnitude can be an insurmountable barrier, forcing them to choose between food and other basic necessities. 9. Angola. Food prices in Angola rose by 19.4% year-on-year on August 2022, easing from a 22.2% surge in the prior month. It was the lowest annual reading since December 2019. It is expected to be 16.5% by the end of this quarter, according to analysts' expectations. Food inflation in the oil-producing southern African nation has been in double digits since mid-2015, but since the start of this year, it has been falling, dropping below 26% in April from 27% in March. High global food prices are an inflation risk, given the country's dependence on imported food, but the strength of the Kwanza currency is a mitigating factor. 8. Egypt. The cost of food in Egypt increased by 21.7% on September 2022 over the same month in the previous year. As of September 2022, the food and non-alcoholic beverages inflation rate in Egypt stood at 4.5% compared to the previous month. In the prior month, the inflation rate for food in the country reached 5.3%, the highest monthly growth in consumer prices registered since 2019. Meanwhile, prices of fresh vegetables continued to decrease due to the increase in the supply of many agricultural products. Food inflation in Egypt is expected to be 20.5% by the end of this quarter, according to analysts' expectations. 7. Nigeria. Food inflation in Nigeria quickened to 23.1% on August 2022 from 22% on July 2022, the highest since October 2005 amidst higher prices of staples, including rice and bread. Notably, the highest increases were recorded in prices of gas, liquid fuel, solid fuel, passenger transport by road, passenger transport by air, fuel, and lubricants for personal transport equipment. According to analysts' expectations, food inflation in Nigeria is expected to be 24% by the end of this quarter. 6. Burundi. The food inflation rate in Burundi increased to 24.5% on August 2022 over the same month in the previous year. In August, staple food prices were around 20 to 30% above the 5-year average and 5 to 40% above prices last year. The rise in food prices is primarily driven by increased transportation costs, high production costs, and high inflation rates. Between January and July 2022, fuel prices increased nearly 40% on the official market, but are 3 times higher on the parallel market. The high fuel prices are increasing transportation and food costs. However, the lifting of the maize import ban that has been in place since March 2021 is likely to improve maize imports through January 2023, slightly improving its availability and lowering food prices. 5. Malawi. The food inflation rate in Malawi increased to 32.5% on August 2022 over the same month in the previous year. Despite consecutive years of good harvest, Malawi has experienced continuous price escalation of staple food commodities unsolved over time. With Russia being one of the world's largest exporters of fertilizers and the largest natural gas exporter, tighter supplies and further upward pressure on fertilizer prices are also expected. Malawi currently imports almost 20% of its fertilizers from Russia. Elevated global fertilizer prices are concerning as reduced availability and accessibility will result in lower food production in Malawi. 4. Ghana. The cost of food in Ghana increased 32.3% on July 2022 over the same month of the previous year. A national workforce of about 45% directly or indirectly employed in the agriculture sector makes it a key contributor to the growth of the economy. However, farming, poultry, fisheries, and forestry are in decline due to a lack of mechanization and access to finance for small-scale farmers, causing local food prices to increase across the country. Annual food inflation in Ghana averaged 9.3% from 2013 until 2022, reaching an all-time high of 32.3% on July 2022 and a record low of 5% on July 2014. It is very surprising that with the introduction of several farmer-friendly agriculture policies by the Ghanaian government, food prices continue to see very fast-paced increases, making the cost of living very high. Frequent increases in petroleum prices are one of the reasons inflation is surging. Farmers across the country are having higher yields. However, they are unable to transport all their produce to marketplaces because the cost of transportation is very high. Deteriorating rural roads, especially in the farming areas, is another reason why foodstuffs do not get to the towns and cities where they are needed most. All these adverse factors caused a surge in the price of produce and the resultant rise in the rate of food inflation. The impact of the lack of artificial fertilizers for farmers cannot be underestimated, especially its impact on food prices. By some estimates, close to 80% of local smallholder farmers could not afford local fertilizer even with government subsidies. The problem with fertilizer is the fact it is usually imported, and the continuous depreciation of the Ghanaian cedi against the dollar by some 17% since the start of 2022 compounds the problem with inadequate supplies. Most Ghanaians are used to buying foodstuffs in the open marketplace. So when these foodstuffs cannot get to consumers in the cities because of high transport cost, bad road network, and lack of storage facilities, they end up either being destroyed or sold at a discount before it gets to the open market. 3. Rwanda. The cost of food in Rwanda increased 34.4% on August 2022 over the same month in the previous year, the most since food inflation began in 2010. The Consumer Price Index that was released by the National Institute of Statistics of Rwanda on August 10, 2022, indicated that prices for food and non-alcoholic beverages increased by 28.6% in urban areas in July 2022 compared to the same month last year. Alcoholic beverages, tobacco, and narcotics prices increased by 10.6%. Among the cited factors in the increasing prices include dry spells, floods which lower agricultural production, and the disrupted supply of some goods on the international market, among other factors. Food inflation in Rwanda is expected to be 28% by the end of this quarter, according to analysts' expectations. 2. Ethiopia. Ethiopia's food inflation rate remains persistently high. The cost of food in Ethiopia increased by 35.5% in July of 2022 over the same month in the previous year. The major factors driving food inflation are spikes in the price of cooking oils and fats, non-alcoholic beverages, bread and cereals, fish and seafoods, dairy and meat products. Weak domestic market supply due to agricultural production constraints and steady devaluation of the local currency are among the major factors contributing to the staggeringly high food inflation levels. The government is trying to remedy the situation, but the digits are still double. Food inflation in Ethiopia averaged 16.5% from 2013 until 2022, reaching an all-time high of 43.9% in May of 2022 and a record low of 2.81% in March of 2014. Food inflation in Ethiopia is expected to be 31% by the end of this year. 1. Zimbabwe. In Zimbabwe, food inflation rates are at very high levels, the highest the continent has witnessed. The increase in food inflation locally is due to the continued depreciation of the Zimbabwe dollar, which has caused increases in the prices of basic goods and services. The annual food inflation rate was estimated at 353% on August 2022, and the country has experienced triple-digit inflation rates since April 2022. The exceptionally steep price increases have been underpinned by the sharp depreciation of the currency and elevated international prices of key food staples and energy. In the second and third quarters of 2022, the government introduced a number of measures to curb inflationary pressure, raising the benchmark interest rate and removing import duties on several key food commodities, including cooking oil, maize meal, and rice, for a period of 6 months from May. These policies contributed to slightly easing the monthly food inflation rate, which was estimated at 14% in August compared to 29% in July. The current food inflation situation in Africa can be solved through a revamp of the agricultural sector. Agriculture is undoubtedly the most important sector in our economy and employs almost 60% of our citizens. However, budget allocation and government expenditure do not reflect this in the sector. What are your thoughts on food inflation in Africa? What solutions can you propose? Let us know in the comments. Like our video if you enjoyed it. Also, if you are really interested in knowing more about Africa, then subscribe to our channel and click the bell icon to get notified when we upload new educative content like this. Thank you for watching and see you in our next video.